Hey everyone, Pete Calandra here. This video is the first half of Class 11 for the Audio MIDI 2 course I'm teaching at the Copeland School of Music, Queens College, City University of New York. The second half of this class, which is a completely different subject matter, will be posted in a couple of days. In today's class, I'm introducing the students to the fundamentals of stereo miking techniques. And the three techniques that we're discussing are XY, coincident, ORTF, and equal spaced. I'm using my Yamaha piano as the sound source, and we go through each technique, take a listen, compare stereo and mono, and then we compare all three so that we can hear the differences one after the other. There'll be chapters and timestamps in the description box below so that you can navigate through this lesson at your own pace. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. Please leave any comments or questions below. Thanks so much for watching, and let's get right into it. Stereo miking is not something that you're going to be able to do, I don't think, unless you own two microphones. And we don't have two microphones in our recording kits. It is something that you should know about and you should understand. So we're going to spend a bit of time going over that right now. The thing with recording in stereo is that there are 5 or 6 stereo techniques. I'm going to present 3 today, and then next week I'm going to present 2 additional ones. So that's 5. When you're recording in stereo, you need to have, except for one technique, which we will go over next week, you need to have the same microphone doubled. They don't have to be matching sets, but they have to be the same microphone. You get better results that way. There is one mid-side recording where you don't have the same microphone, but with the 3 methods that I'm going to show you today and teach you today, you do need the same microphone. So they can be 2 large capsule condenser microphones, or they can be 2 small capsule condenser microphones. For today's techniques, we're going to focus on using cardioid polar pattern. Next week, we will use additional polar patterns. But for today, we're just going to use cardioid. Now, everybody remembers that cardioid is when the microphone picks up the sound in front of it. So my mic capsule is pointed up here, and it's picking up the sound here, and it's rejecting the sound in the back, right? So that's cardioid. For today's stereo miking, I used a pair of these small condenser microphones that I have. These are Neumann 184. Now, if you notice that these are, I've showed these before in the past, these are a little different than this microphone. This is where you address it on the side, and this is on the top. The sound goes in here, right? And so this is ideal for 2 of the miking techniques that we're going to talk about today. For the third miking technique, you can use a microphone like this or microphones like this, equally good. So this is a small capsule condenser mic because the microphone capsule is small, right? And this is a large one because the microphone capsule is bigger. We went over that in a previous class. There are 3 techniques that I'm going to show you today. One is coincident, or XY it's called, and that's when the microphones look like this, right? And they're at a 45-degree angle to each other. The next one is called ORTF, and that's when the microphones are it's supposed to be at a 117-degree angle, but I did today at about a 90-degree angle this way, like a V, an X kind of. And then the other one is equal spaced. Now, what helps when you're doing these things is to have a spacer bar, right? And I've got 2 here. I've got a few of these. I've got 2 here. This one is very sturdy. And it also helps if you have something like this that you can attach to a mic stand, because if you attach this to a mic stand, whichever, it's going to be pointing like this if you've got it on a boom stand, or pointing like this if you've got it on a flat stand. And you can't really like have a boom stand out like this and have these pointing up, which means that the microphones, which I'll show you in a second, can face out here. But if you've got it hooked up to an attachment like this, right, this can go on the mic stand, this part here, and then you can freely position this little attachment here to angle the microphone, and you will see that because I've got pictures. With the spacer bar, you take the microphone clip, and you have to push this part out far, because if it's just hanging like this, this won't take. But you push it out so that this part is flush, and then you'll be able to twist this in. Seriously, you'll be able to twist this in like that. See? And then you can loosen it a little bit and move it, slide it back and forth, and position it wherever you want. You can also do this with two microphone stands, but with the spacer bar, it gives you an advantage over two microphone stands. It's easier to make sure that, remember last week when I talked about that the microphones have to be equidistant from the sound source. So when you're on the spacer bar, that helps you out. So this is here, right? And then you can just pop this on like this. Then if I want to angle it down, right, I have all of these options like this. And this can go on the mics, the boom mic, and this could be pointed like this. It can be manipulated, and this additional bit really is helpful. And it's got, you hook the other one up over here. We'll take a look at the pictures that I took. So let's take a look at some images. So I'm standing above the microphone, right? And see how I've got the spacer bar set up here? And then the microphones are at 90-degree angle. Sometimes some guys like to have the one microphone above the other one, right? That also works. And this is in my piano, right? Now, what you have to do is you have to find, there we go. There's another view. You have to find where middle C is on the piano, and then have the microphones be right. So I had to move this over. Middle C is right above the letter P on piano right here. And notice I've got them so that they're facing down a little bit. Now, this is XY. This is very good. And if I was recording this for, like jazz piano that was in a rhythm section, I would probably have this a little bit closer to the hammers. And the reason I would do that is that it would pick up the percussiveness from the hammer, and it would let you have the sound cut through the rhythm section a little bit more, right? But I'm a little far away from the hammers right now. I would have to use a different mic stand and one with a longer arm than this one in order to get this in the center and up close. Now, one thing to remember when you're miking this, the microphone that's on the right as you're looking at it is pointed to the left, and the microphone that's on the left as you're looking at it is pointed to the right. So that means the left channel will pick up your right hand, and the right channel will pick up your left hand. It's sort of opposite. So that's one thing you have to remember with XY, is that it's opposite what you would normally think. So what I did was I plugged this one into the odd number channel on my interface, which I used channels 3 and 4, and this one into the even number 4. And 3 is left and 4 is right. Yeah. So, okay, so we've seen all these. So what I did was I just sort of improvised. I played an excerpt from Bach, and I improvised a few different styles, and I tried to do the same thing with the 3 different mic positions, right? It's similar music, not exactly the same. So what we're going to do is we'll listen to the XY, and then I'll discuss it a little bit. Okay, so that's a very clean sound. There's not a lot of ambience. It's very close. I have the piano cover because I didn't want to. There was some outside noise that I didn't want to catch on the recording, but it's a very. It's not a very wide stereo spread, so it'll cut through. It'll cut through a mix very easily if it's in with a dense orchestration, right? Because it's got a point to the sound. And just to show you what I mean by that, when I push this little red button here, and that becomes this little blue button here, and it gets lit, that sums the output into mono, so we can hear the difference. So let's take it from, let's listen to the stride again. Right, you can hear it does change, but you don't lose any low end. And the reason for that is that this is in pretty good phase. So what do I mean by that? That means that the sounds, you could see that all of these transients are very close to being spot on, right? Very close, right? So that's in phase. And maybe I'll play around with the phase a little bit after I go through the microphone so we can hear what it sounds like out of phase. So that when this gets collapsed to mono, you are losing some sense of the room. There is a little bit of the room. And when I go into mono, you can hear, like, I'll play these chords, the first couple with the in stereo and then in mono, and then after the chord is over, listen to the room sound that occurs between chords, and then when it's in mono, you'll hear less of it. All right, let's take a look at our next example, ORTF. All right, so you see, true ORTF actually has a wider spread to it, but the issue with that when you're close miking something, right, I'm inside the piano, is that it creates, it's supposed to be at 117 degrees. Well, I don't have a protractor to figure that out, but they do make actually spacer bars that have degree numbers on them, right? Which is very helpful. But the problem when you're close miking something with that is that if something is spread out like that at 117, if this is 90 degrees, well, it's easier for me to do with the microphones. So if this is at 90 degrees like this, right? That looks like an L. If I space it further out to get to 117 degrees, because of the cardioid patterns, it's going to leave a donut hole in the middle, like right in the middle where there's not going to pick up a lot of sound. So when you're playing the piano, a lot of playing is done in the midsection, right around middle C, and you'll actually lose some of the perspective. So the one good thing about these two microphone techniques is that you can play around a little bit with the angle to get the sound that you want, as long as both microphones are equidistant from the sound source, they'll stay in phase. Right? So I've made this is not even 90 degrees. So it's not going to have as big a stereo spread, but it will be in phase because the microphone is equidistant from the strings. Oh, that's bad. I took these with my phone, so they're really noisy. There's a lot of grain in them. All right, so let's take a listen to ORTF. ORTF. So let me play through the whole thing, and I just noticed something that I didn't notice before, but I'll let it play through and talk about it. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to compare these two in a minute because I wasn't listening with headphones on before. I was listening through my speakers when I heard it played back, and I've just noticed a few things. So let's take this stride piece and then we'll pop it back and forth between mono and stereo. With this one, you can really hear the stereo field being squashed more because it is wider. What I noticed there's a timbral difference with this one here. If we listen to this first bit with the XY, it's a little brighter, but it also has kind of a nasally character to it. But this is warmer. Fuller. You know, that's a really nice sound. You also hear a little bit more ambience, and the way you can tell that is, let's listen to some of these high notes. Some of these high notes, after I play those notes, you don't hear a lot of ringing with the XY, and you'll hear more ringing with the ORTF. So let me turn my microphone off, and we'll just go back and forth. So I play the low note in my left hand, and then I'm rolling a chord. After the chord is rolled, listen to the high notes that ring afterwards and see if you can pick out the difference in sound between the XY and the ORTF. The ORTF has more ambience afterwards. It's capturing more of the ambience. And I think that's because it's aimed at those high strings, which don't have the additional muting on them that some of the mid-range strings do. So that's where all your, it's called the duplex section of the piano, I believe. So let's listen to that. So you're listening to the after ringing, after I roll the chord. Right there, it's a little, you're not hearing a lot of high end sparkle. Listen. So you're hearing all that sparkle and you're hearing sort of the sound afterwards. Right? So what I'm getting at here is that I think for solo piano, in this use case, not every use case, I'm liking the ORTF better. Right? Anybody have any comments from what you're hearing? No? It's all clear as a bell? You guys are getting it?
I would say for the solo piano, I could hear the difference. If you're fitting it into a lot of other instruments, the other one may be more desirable to give you a little more sonic space.
Correct. I agree with that totally. Yeah. The other one would be the XY would probably punch through a mix a lot easier with a lot of instruments. But for solo piano, so far I like the ORTF. So let's take a look at equal spaced and in images, and then we'll talk about it. We'll listen to the performance. Now, there's two ways to do equal space. So we're going to do equal spaced inside the piano and outside the piano. So with equal spaced inside the piano, you notice that, right, I've got them parallel to each other, the microphones, and there's a space. And the way I've got them positioned is that this one here, the one that's on the, as you're looking at it on the left, is about halfway over the bass strings, and this one is about halfway over the treble strings, and I need to get in there with a vacuum cleaner. Look at that. Oh my goodness. My new piano is filthy. All right. And I've got this sort of angled so that this is a little closer to these strings, but the distance between here and where the string is exactly the same. It's just that it's angled, instead of it being like this, it's angled a little bit like this. All right. And you'll see some people put them over the sound holes here. Everybody's got a different thing, and every piano is different. You got to experiment around. All right. So let's take a look at another one. These are all the same. Oh, there we go. Right. You could see these are equidistant from the piano strings. And notice this is the furthest away from the hammers we are, right? And a funny thing happened. I didn't change the recording level, and this one is louder for some reason. Here we go. A little bit of stumbling fingers there at the end, but just listen to a little bit more. Now, I'm going to play this last bit here afterwards. So with this one here, what I'm noticing now, especially in this area here, is I can hear as I'm playing my chords lower and lower and lower, the sound is subtly going across the stereo spectrum more than on any of the other ones. And also, I think that I like this sound the best out of the three so far for this use case, because you get some of the same characteristics of this and this combined. So this is very clear, but you also get the spaciousness that's found in this one, right? So I still think that this would be the better for rhythm section, but this is a nice compromise between the two. Although what I will say is that for classical piano, none of these are good. You got to get away from the piano a little bit more. It's too harpsichord like with it being so close. So when I'm playing that little Bach excerpt, yeah, it's just a little bit too close. And what you can do is additionally is you can have it mic'd like that, and then you could have another stereo microphone pair that's outside of the piano capturing a little bit further away. And you could combine the two images as long as the integrity of each stereo image is kept. In other words, each stereo pair of mics is equidistant from the sound source. These two mics are equidistant from the sound source, and these two mics, even though they're further away, they are equidistant within themselves to the sound source. You can blend two stereo mic pairs together, and that, you know, a lot of times when you're hearing solo piano record in the studio, you're actually hearing sometimes 6 microphones, 8 microphones, you know. Sometimes there's even a microphone that's placed underneath the piano to capture the wood from the sound. So those are really advanced stereo techniques, and I do them sometimes, but I just want to present this basics to you guys. So now that's inside the piano. Let's take a look at equal spaced outside the piano. And, you know, if it was a little bit noisy when I was doing this earlier, so I couldn't be as far away as I wanted to be, but let me just show you. Right, outside the piano. I typically would like this a little bit like another 2 feet outside the piano, but this is better than... Right, and you could see that this is still pointed in this area for the high notes, and this is still pointed in this area for the low notes. And this is looking down the piano. Right, you could see that this guy is capturing this up here, and this guy is capturing all this. Plus, you have to realize that the piano lid is a reflective surface. So if I had space and, You know, I hate getting dust in my instrument, and it's dusty enough as it is. But what really would be great is if I could take this lid off, but this lid is really heavy. I'd need 2 or 3 people to help me lift that off and unscrew it, and I wouldn't do it. But this is a reflective surface, this piano lid up here, so the sound will come up and reflect, and these microphones will capture that reflected sound. Okay, let's listen to Equal Space outside the piano. See, that's so much better for classical piano. So with this one, you can hear more of the room. It's further away. Let's do the stereo and mono bit with these 2 different miking techniques and see what that does. So let's go to the stride here. Let me turn my mic off, and I'll go back and forth between mono and stereo. Interesting, right? So let's take a listen. What I want to do is I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to play the little Bach excerpt in each of the miking styles, starting with the XY. ORTF. Equal spaced. Equal spaced outside the piano. Let me just quickly go through a couple of beats of each one. So what I'm hearing in this last one is that there's a little bit too much mid-range. So you can obviously go and clean that up with EQ. Just to take a little scoop there. Now, and that comes, you know, it cleans that up. So let me just play a little bit of this bit here, and then if I was going to mix this, I'd add some reverb, I'd beef up the low end just a little bit, and bring some of the top end down a little. It still is a Yamaha piano, and then just scoop a little of those mids out. So let's take a listen. And this is with equal space inside the piano. Okay, so for me, that sounds pretty good. You know, I would have no qualms with a little bit better performance where I wasn't a little sloppy in a few spots. I would have no problems just, you know, having that mastered and released, right? So that's, you know, and that's done with just my audio interface that's on my desk, which is my Apollo. I didn't use my expensive Neve mic preamp, didn't use that. And actually, I have another pair of stereo small capsule condenser microphones that I like better for piano because they've got tubes in them, but that requires more setup because it has a separate power supply, so there's more cables and, you know, more like AC outlets needed. But these are good microphones. They're just not my favorite for my pianos. Yeah, so that's an introduction to stereo miking. Now there's just one other little bit that I want to do here. So I set the equal spaced mics up here, and then I just walked back and forth so you can hear, and then I spread them out a little further so you can hear how it captures things in different parts of the stereo field. Okay, I'm on one side and now I'm walking. Okay, I'm on one side and now I'm walking across, and you should hear the sound moving and actually changing as I move from one room into another room. And now you'll hear it coming out of a different speaker if you're listening with headphones on. Check 1 2, check 1 2, check 1 2, and this is equal spaced, about a foot apart. Okay, so it's not super stereo. I could make it more stereo by ORTFing it a little. That sounds a little nasty, but if I do something like that, then you'll get a much more stereo spread. So now I'm in the living room, and my voice will have a certain kind of ambience, and I'm walking towards the microphone, and now I'm between both microphones. I'm about 3 feet away, and then I'm moving now over to the other side of the microphone, and you should hear the stereo field moving. So that's stereo. You know, many great recordings were recorded with 1 and 2 microphones. You know, it wasn't until the 1960s where you really started getting the proliferation of multi-microphone techniques, and you know, where you've got like microphones on every instrument, right? And blending that in. A lot of great classical recordings were made with 1 microphone, with 2 microphones, or with 3 microphones, in a different stereo recording technique called decatry, but we're not going to go over that. I'm not really set up to teach that, and we don't even have a tree at the college, I don't think. So, yeah, like you listen to some of these recordings, like Count Basie at Newport in 1950s, something like that. It sounds incredible. It's in stereo. You can hear that it's in stereo, but it's recorded with 2 microphones. It's just that you got great players that know how to balance and blend themselves, and that's part of getting a performance. And let me just show you a couple of things here. So there's a couple of spots, like in this performance here, right here, where I played really loudly these couple of notes here, and they stick out. They don't sound good in the recording. You know, they stick out a little bit. They're not smooth. Some of these here, this area here, right? And this here, this is really piercing, right? So, you know, you got to be careful when you're recording that I've mentioned this before, that you know, if you're singing, you have microphone technique, you back away from the microphone a little bit. If you're playing, you just reduce your dynamics just a little bit. The louds aren't as loud and the softs aren't as soft. Now, that's just for what we're doing in our class. Obviously, if you're doing a live concert and you're being mic'd up, you're going to play with all of your normal dynamics, right, in the concert hall and everything like that. That's a different story. But for in the studio kind of recording, which is what we're sort of trying to emulate here, the home studio, you know, to just loud's not as loud and soft's not as soft. If I had used my expensive mic pre, those wouldn't sound so spiky to me. But, you know, most built-in mic pre's on audio interfaces, while for the amount of money you actually spend for the audio interfaces that you have, they do an amazing job compared to what was available 7 or 8 years ago. They're still not as good as having a dedicated mic preamp. Yeah. Or having a big console with like all Neve or SSL or API mic pre's in them. Okay, so that's an introduction to stereo miking. I hope that was, you know, we're not going to be doing it, but I think that it's important for me to present this to you guys.
Pete?
Yes.
I use a combination. I have my Neumann TLM 103 and my direct guitar, because I only have, that's all. I mean, I have another mic, but it's not, I find for acoustic guitar, basically, I'm talking about, that's my stereo, hard right, hard left, but it's still hard to match the EQs of the direct.
Right, so what I would do.
That's a different, yeah.
That's not stereo. That's the best for me, and I do that too sometimes, Paul, because my Martin has a pickup in it that I put. I've got a pickup. What you have to do, and you have to be careful about phase, right? So when you record that, you got to look at the waveforms, and you see here on my screen here how the left and the right both start at the same time. I bet that with your direct and your microphone might be a little bit out of phase. So what do I mean by that? Let me show you. So I just split that into mono, right? So let's say that it looked a little bit like this, right? That's out of phase. So let's hear what that sounds like. Right? It sounds more stereo, which is interesting because the sound is reaching your ears at different times. And remember last week we went over and we showed that just a couple of hundred samples, you can 20, 30, 40 samples, you can hear that difference in time. And but what's about this is that if hold on, give me 1 second, Paul.
Yeah, that sounds like it's flanging.
Yeah, well, give me a second. I'll just show you what the thing of that is. So if I make that stereo, I'm mono, you can really hear a big difference, and you're losing some of the low end. And you can hear that it almost sounds like there's two pianos playing instead of one on that roll. You hear a double attack. So when you're recording a direct input with a guitar and a microphone, you have to make them phase aligned by making sure that the attacks happen at the same spot by sliding it around, right? And what I would suggest you try doing is making that a mono signal and not a stereo signal, and blending the sounds together in a mono way.
2 mono tracks.
Panned in the center.
Panned in the center.
Yeah, and blending them together. Yep, so that it's an aggregate sound. Try that.
So to get a stereo,
you get a stereo. What I would do if I were you, Paul, for stereo, and I'll go over this next week, is I would try mid-side. So you get a microphone that's got a figure 8 pattern on it, right? And you use your Neumann and the second one, and I'll show you how to do that next week. But just think about mid-side. Do some research on it. It's really great for acoustic guitar. All right, there's plenty of videos you could watch online with that. I just didn't. That's not great for piano. I'm going to do some of the same bit here we did with mid-side with my acoustic guitar next week, but I'll set that up in advance so that we can really hear what the stuff sounds like.